Okay, good morning, and thanks for making it to this Consortium Building event. We're delighted to be here at the National Railway Museum. We're on tour basically at the moment, myself and the team. So Glasgow and Newcastle yesterday. That was a pretty difficult gig to do, split, but we're trying to reach out through these events to make sure that what we think, this is a kind of unprecedented competition in a way, in terms of its funding and indeed a programme, the Audience of the Future programme. So we're trying to make sure that we do everything we can to get the best propositions to come forward, and so this is just the start of it. The competition actually opens on Monday and has a ludicrously short timescale. I'm sure you'll all complain about that, but we are hemmed in at one end by the comprehensive spending review period, and hemmed in at the other end by actually the time it's taken to frame the programme in a way that the Department for Business recognise as R&D, essentially what's an investment in content. So that's where we are. So I was just going to, how are we going to run the day? So welcome and introductions. That's where we are at the moment. I'm going to do a scene setter outlining the Audience of the Future programme, where it's come from. This is a different kind of thing. It is not neither traditional academic research nor is it traditional industrial research funding, but something slightly different. So it's kind of important for us that you all understand where this is coming from and what the objectives are. Then, having done that, we're going to have some short presentations, because one of the things, the underlying thing about this is what we want everybody to do is come up with propositions that move the state of the art significantly forward. So one of the things is, what is the state of the art? So I'll be joined by a panel who will present some work on what they think the state of the art is, what they've done, and where things are going, and then I'll follow up that with a discussion, trying to draw out some of the themes of how that will relate to the programme. Then we're going to have a break for lunch where you can all talk to each other, and then we've got a kind of slightly structured networking session. Now I say slightly structured because we did use this model that my colleague Tara Salisbury brought to Stratford for the performance people, and it worked brilliantly. But then they're all performance people, and they've played so many theatre games and things that they just assume this is what you do. Everybody moves to the left and you do this. So it'll be interesting to see if the visitor experience, heritage museums and gallery sector respond in the same way. I'm hoping you will. And then I'll do a wrap-up and the next steps and the timelines and things, and we should be finished by 3 o'clock. So I better start by saying what we're trying to do. So the origin of this, so I'm the challenge director, interim challenge director, so I'm looking after this for at least the next 6 months, by which time we will have made the decisions on the demonstrator programme. So that'll be interesting, short period to take this through. The origins of this are obviously in the industrial strategy. So about a year ago, the first green paper came out on the industrial strategy and identified a number of initial projects. So the industrial strategy, the thinking behind it is that support for research and development in key sectors of the UK economy is both a legitimate and unnecessary use of public funds. Obviously, the background for this is in a post-Brexit world, which are the key sectors of the economy that can sustain economic growth in the UK. And the consequence of that was when the industrial strategy first came out, so the projects for the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund, the R&D fund behind this, when the first project came out, they had a certain kind of characteristic. So there was significant support for the automotive sector, very large investments in what's now become the Faraday Institute to develop battery technology. There was significant programme in autonomous vehicles in dangerous environments, aka support for the oil and gas sector, and multiple, because they're always at the front of the queue, the medics, multiple interventions around the life sciences, biomedical research and pharma. So very, very traditional research and technology intensive sector of the economy, what you'd think of as classic. So despite the fact that the creative industries are larger than those three sectors combined, there was nothing in the initial characterisation of the industrial strategy for the UK's creative industries, which obviously are the fastest growing sector of the economy, probably around 9% of GVA and a similar proportion of employment. So what we found out through that was that though you'll rarely meet a policymaker who will say the creative industries aren't a key sector of the economy, and there are very few people who would now have the kind of assumption that the creative industries are kind of fluffy and loveys and peripheral, the kind of way that you would have found in Whitehall maybe 10 years ago. The idea that research and development or innovation funding or an approach to intervention there in the creative industries was the right thing to do, or even a part of it, was not at all common. So we spent most of the last year working, a group of us working with the research councils, particularly the AHRC in the first instance, and now Innovate UK, changing that. So we've got the first programme that we got out of the blocks was the Creative Industries Clusters programme, which some of you in the room just wave to those people who have spent most of the last 3 months completing their bids for this programme. We had a shortlist of 22, which we will be funding 8 of these university-led research and development partnerships around the UK. We're now towards the latter stages of that competition. We've got some fantastic propositions, interestingly fantastic propositions that are a number of which bleed into this area or indeed occupy it. So that was the first programme that's taken an industrial strategy approach to the creative industries and R&D, university-led. This programme, as it were, is the flip side. So whereas that was university-led with business R&D partners, this is business R&D with research partners. So that was it was great to get the clusters programme, but at the same time, Peter Bazalgette, in his independent review of the creative industries, which preceded the sector deal that was recently signed, Baz pointed out he thought clusters were the key intervention, but he saw, with a lot of encouragement, I have to say, he saw that the innovation challenge that faced the creative industries, it was unusual that there was one that multiple bits of the creative industry saw, which was the transition to experiences enabled by immersive technologies. And that this represents both an opportunity and a threat for the UK, because we perform in core sectors of the creative industries very well globally, but if there's a disruptive move to a new mode of experience for the audience and delivery and production for the producers, it's not necessary that we are going to succeed in the same way in that, and that therefore we should make an intervention around R&D in this area. So we ended up, when the Industrial Strategy White Paper came out, as one of the second ways to challenge this challenge audience of the future, with £33 million of government funding committed to a series of interventions, which I'll run through. There was a fantastic that it had an asterisk there, which was to be confirmed. And we kind of thought, that's fantastic, we might get more money, because we'd asked for a lot more. But no, indeed, it was confirmed exactly at that figure. So the thing about these industrial strategy challenges is they do all have to line up behind a challenge. So you have no idea how hard it was to get a lot of people to try and find this down. But we ended up with this for Audience of the Future, which I think is really important in two ways, and it refers back to what Baz had identified, which is the opportunity here for the creative sector is in the experiences, not in the technology. So, AKA experiences equals content. So that, it was incredibly helpful that Baz pointed that out, because that was the argument we've been trying to make, is this isn't a technology intervention, this is creative industries intervention. So the challenge is capturing new global audiences and grow our leading market position in creative content products and services by adopting, exploiting and developing immersive technologies. So that formulation, it's about the economic objective of this is around growing our position in the content, the experiences, by using the technology, not by investing in the technology per se. So we've got a kind of rationale behind the whole Audience of the Future programme. So as I said, that basically it's that these technologies, and we'll perhaps talk a little bit about what we mean by those technologies, but AR, VR, XR, all the other stuff, are the most significant and potentially disruptive technology impact since the web in the mid-90s. And I think, as someone who's running had just set up a digital internet production business then, it has many similarities with that period in that knowledge is unevenly distributed. It exists in pockets. We're not quite sure who's going to win, who's going to be the big successful companies or the big successful interventions. But there's a huge amount of innovation going on at possibly too small a scale. So this is an opportunity and a threat for the UK because we're currently a great IP producer as well as a great production centre, and global competitiveness in both of those doesn't necessarily follow through to this, especially when the major platforms and technology providers are not UK-based businesses. And that the commercial opportunity is through the content experiences, so the subscriptions, the rights, the experiences, the bums on seats that we sell, not through the exploitation of the technology underlying it. So that was our rationale. We've got some programme objectives. I won't dwell too much. I mean, that by 2025, we're a global market leader in the creative immersive sector, and we probably already are. Don't necessarily tell the Treasury that. We probably already are, but in 7 years' time, this market is going to be completely different and much, much bigger. And the only other metric we got pinned down to was creating 10% of global creative immersive content. So we're having to baseline that at the moment, the situation. And 10% of global content in this area is not an unreasonable expectation when you think that 20% of the global film box office last year was UK films, highest it's ever been. So this has followed through into the industrial strategy, through in the industrial strategy to the creative industry sector deal. In fact, this programme and the clusters programme represent the bulk of the money in the creative industry sector deal. So that's great. We've got the industry behind us, we've got government behind us. It does bring a certain degree of anxiety that we actually now have to do it, and people will notice if we don't. So there's some expectations from the industry side around the whole programme. They are that it will de-risk investment. So at the moment, there's a lot of small-scale experimentation with immersive across every sector. But what seems to be holding larger-scale investment back is the lack of viable mass audience propositions, which you can then build a business model around. So there's a big expectation there that the things we'll do in this programme will de-risk that by testing things at scale and allowing people to then build business models around it. There's an expectation that there'll be innovation in production tools, so making this stuff more efficient to produce, faster to produce, maybe cheaper to produce, and also there's an expectation, particularly in the screen industries, that will contribute to reskilling the workforce, because we cannot do this and make the most of these technologies just by assuming that new entrants into the business will be skilled in them through coming out of universities. We have to work with expert talent that's already in the industry. How do you tell stories in a spherical world? How do you design for it? How do you write for it? So that's a particular problem around the screen industries. And what we're trying to do is get engagement across the value chain. So obviously a core part of this is those what Immerse UK call specialist AR, VR, XR immersive companies. But they can't do this on their own. They're incredibly, there is a community, growing sector of very inventive, creative businesses using this technology to create content and experiences. But we need everybody else to be involved in this, and actually it won't work if it's just those specialists. So we need the whole value chain. So content studios, IP owners, or in the sense of how I think with cultural institutions, brand owners, cultural brand owners, the creative tech companies, but hardware providers and the platform operators. We need to take the investors along with that, and we've got some plans for that. But also we don't know how the distribution chain works in this. So whatever passes for distribution, we'll need to bring them along too. So we've got £33 million of grant funding, and we've got three major bits. So there's the Demonstrator Programme, of which this day is focused on. We've got a collaborative R&D programme, which is also reasonably generously funded. And we've got a £5 million for an industry centre of excellence, and that's not across the whole sector. It's got some very specific targets, which, if anybody wants to know more about ICE, as we charmingly call it, there are people in the room who will be only too happy to talk about it. So the demonstrator programme, the key is we think we're largely still at a pre-commercial stage in this sector. So what we're looking for is in a very ambitious pre-commercial content innovations that are tied to global IP, which I'll talk about the reasoning behind that in a moment. But what we're really looking at with the demonstrators is new experiences that advance the state of the art, and I will keep saying this, and test it with real audiences at scale. So it's important to remember those three things. And they're large collaborations across the supply chain. The CRD programme, collaborative R&D, which is common to anybody who knows the Innovate model, we're going to slice into a number of different bits. So we're also launching on Monday a design innovations competition. So demonstrators is really massive. The designing for future audiences, design foundations, is taking projects really at a conceptual stage early on. So we're going to run that programme, and hopefully we'll run that twice over the course of the project. We're going to do something around production tools. So this is our mid-price offering. So projects 100,000 to £500,000, collaborative projects that are around creating experiences, but looking at the underlying workflows. And then we're going to do an investment acceleration piece where we're going to work with a group of private sector investors, match their public money with them, and invest in single companies' development pipelines. And as I say, the Industry Centre of Excellence is very much focused on the issues of the screen industries. It's going to deliver talent development programs across a series of ranges, and experimental production for the screen industry. So this is learning by doing, by making projects, but using that as a way of developing talent. And that's actually the point where this crosses over the clusters programme. So it's going to sit on top of one or more of the clusters. So this is what we're going to talk about today, the demonstration programme. Actually, and that's all the good bit. This is where it starts to get worrying. £33 million of public money, £56 million in all. How can that happen? Well, that's match funding, because this is industry, this is industrial research. There is match funding required to it, and so the target is to make this a £56 million programme. But the other thing, rather than the numbers, the thing that I point to on this slide is the timescale. So we have 3 financial years to do it, and we're already a month and a bit into year 1. So we've got to get this moving at pace. We've got some objectives to start to spend money within the current financial year, which is all quite scary when we start to think about these bigger projects. So we've got to get moving. That is a constraint. And the only thing I can say about the ludicrous timescale that you have to submit bids for this is this won't work if we don't do that. But we've got to do our bit in understanding the stage that your ideas will be at. So why demonstrators? So again, it's an investment in content. Again, it's the idea that investment is currently held back by lack of scale, lack of reaching mass propositions, because without that you can't drive commercial models. And the underlying really rationale for the demonstrators is, in the creative sector, advances are made through works, through kind of seminal works that then make advances that everybody can then develop. So all this adds up, as we explain to the teenagers that one meets from the Treasury along the way in these things, that this justifies public investment in a series of large-scale, pre-commercial, collaborative, therefore state aid avoiding demonstrator programs, projects, which will stimulate content innovation, audience testing, and business modelling at scale. So what is it? So we've got up to £16 million in this. The maximum grant for any one project is £4 million. I actually changed this slide last night because we'd said we're going to fund 4 projects at £4 million. We're not necessarily going to fund 4 projects at £4 million, but if we've got 4 killer propositions, that's the max. We can only afford to do 4 if they take the maximum grant. And we've identified 4 areas where there's a maximum opportunity in terms of capability, in terms of kind of global presence, and in terms of the creative opportunity. So that's performance, which we did a similar meeting to this at the RSC in Stratford with a lot of performance companies and the commercial investors in performance as well. Moving image, which we're doing on Monday. Sports entertainment, that's Tuesday in Edgbaston, because we like to theme our presentations. So the cricket ground, and then visitor experience, which we're here to talk about today. So again, at the risk of repeating, I always think it's actually quite useful to repeat yourself. It's not an accident, it's just to get the message across. So we're looking for projects in visitor experience that can significantly advance the creative, technological and commercial state of the art across the whole sector. Significantly advancing the state of the art of only one of those will not fly in this competition. So what do we mean? Well, what do we mean by immersive experience? Well, say in the performance sector or in the film sector, there's two parts to it. There's immersive experiences and technologies that are around involved in production workflows. So this is Gravity. Lots of innovation there around the virtualization of the design of the movie, and obviously this is the obligatory Andy Serkis slide. Everybody has to have one. This is my favourite at the moment because I think Andy's looking particularly moody. So this is motion capture as used in Planet of the Apes. Again, in performance on stage, we've seen current state of the art might best be represented by, this is the other obligatory slide, which is the RSC's Tempest, which Imaginarium and Intel worked with them on. So you've got a live motion captured performance character projected into the show. And the greatest thing about this production of Tempest, which I saw as a punter, is that it's a great production of the Tempest. The aerial character works, but Simon Russell Beale's Prospero was not harmed by having a load of CGI in the production. In sport, we've got a lot of interest from sports that are very heavily technological, like Formula One, where there's lots of data and people are starting to think about what is the experience. Can you create a kind of added audience layer, which is an immersive experience at home? This is, we've got Greg from Rewind here, so this is one of a piece that Rewind did around the Red Bull Air Race. It's a kind of development piece with HoloLens. So could you have an augmented reality tabletop experience along with the kind of broadcast? But perhaps for this sector, for the visitor experience, we've got the idea of augmenting perhaps exhibition spaces that many of you are responsible for. So the idea that you can add a data layer, an augmented reality layer, within a gallery or within a museum or within a whole building. But I think we've also got to think about augmenting geographies, augmenting spaces, and that's perhaps something that we'll discuss on the panel, because here's another example of the work that we'll perhaps discuss on the panel. So this is a completely different take. This is Factory 42's work with David Attenborough and the NHM, so creating Hold the World, a virtual experience that isn't in the NHM, but is, in a way, and a very complete piece of work. Other things that we might want to think about are work that certainly I think is very interesting in areas. People like 59 Productions, who combine multiple technologies in theatre spaces. Whether so this is not just about headsets. I think it's really important that we're talking about the future. It isn't just about headsets. It's about creating immersive experiences through a blend of technologies. This is for the Howard Brenton play that they launched the new theatre in Southampton. So it's a play about the making of the Spitfire, and it uses all sorts of nano winches. I've never come across nano winches before, but that's apparently what they use to manipulate the light sculpture. And we've also got things like film. So Secret Cinema is a very old Secret Cinema picture. These are immersive experiences created around other media. They're blends of performance, of things the audience do, but to create an immersive experience. What I'm trying to give the impression is we have quite an expansive kind of idea about what we mean by immersive experiences. One of my favourites recently, and I think that has moved everybody's experience on, is The Void, which I don't know if anybody here, I know some people in the room have done. So this is a walkthrough VR experience, part game, part narrative that occupies within the Star Wars universe. And the best thing about it is the projection mapping, which is not perfect, but you go in, you put your visor down, and you are a stormtrooper. And if you go with your kids, they are little stormtroopers, which is the best thing in it. But again, this is a playthrough experience. It's a 15-minute experience. It's architected before the experience and a little bit after the experience. And it's a very exciting blend of narrative and VR. And then we've got experiences that are just kind of crazy. This is a piece by Alex McDowell, famous production designer who's advising us on the project, and the head of the World Building Institute at USC. So this is flying a 50-foot whale called Leviathan over the crowd attending an event at CES. This is 18 months ago. Of course, that whale's not really there unless you see it through a device. So it's a fascinating film to watch online, to watch the audience's reaction to realising that in one sense there's a 50-foot whale flying over their head, in another sense it's not there at all. And things like, this is a piece by BDH, so I think we're interested in how you view these things, how we experience them, not as solo people just wearing a helmet, but in different audience environments. This is so John Durrant, BDH, they worked with the Magritte estate, created a headset-based VR experience for Magritte, but then in a kind of appropriately Magritte-like way, they built a theatre inside that hat so that people could experience it as a communal experience as well. So quite wide. What are we trying to achieve? Well, the objectives really are innovation, so new audience experiences. We want insight for the wider sector, so each demonstrator has to reach an audience of 100,000. That is one of the very few rules in this competition. You have to reach them, and you have to derive income from them. So these are people you learn something about. And the other objective is capacity building and knowledge sharing. So what we're looking for each consortium to do is to have sufficient reach within this consortium to advance knowledge across the sector. So we're expecting you to have a plan of how you might do that. So the requirements, when it comes down to actually the rules of the competition, they're very few, but they're very, very firm. So you've got to demonstrate you can significantly enhance the current state of the art in your chosen field, so we're talking visitor experience today, creatively, technologically, and commercially. So we expect you to hit all three of those. You have to deliver to an audience of 100,000 and gather the insight. And this is a rule that has works differently in the different areas. You have to use, partner with, or have access to globally recognised IP. Now, sometimes we stop at that point, but for this point, it's worth expanding. That includes cultural institutions and brands. And we've got specific reasons for why each of those. So, as I say, you've got to significantly enhance the current state of the art, the creative proposition, the audience proposition, the commercial proposition, and your technical implementation. Why 100,000 users? Well, it's because we're thinking we need enough scale to actually derive the insight, both commercially and audience and behavioural insight. But you might do that through more than one audience propositional test. So you've got the lifetime of the project to accumulate your... I'm just trying to work out that one. Does sound like it, doesn't it? Some people might build up to one thing with one test, one live event, possibly. That sounds a bit risky. You might build up to that over time. You might have a series of different tests in different environments. And the reason to use globally recognised IP or the cultural brands, some of whom are in the room, is that we didn't want to spend all the money on audience acquisition. It's been a failure of technology programmes in the past that have tried to experiment with new content, that they have not found the audience to test at scale. So they've done some great thing, but nobody's seen it. We think right from the start that, and as I say, it works differently in the different sectors, that partnering with these brands that already have name recognition, they already have channels to audience, they already have understanding of audience in this sector, or partnering with significant IP in the moving image sector. So let's not spend all the money inventing characters if we can use characters that are available and have market presence. It's likely to be more efficient. But also, it's important because it informs the commercial model. If you don't deal seriously with rights, say in sport, if you make something that could work for any sport, but you don't engage in how commercially the rights will work, then you won't learn very much. Ambition and scale. So this is developed recently. So Jeremy Bonson from Stanford came over a couple of weeks ago and made this comment, which immediately caused a bit of anxiety. At the scale that we're talking about, so 4 million of grant, bigger project size than that, each one of these will be currently the biggest creative VR project in the world. That's a bit of a worry. I think there's a few things to say about it. It is very ambitious, but it's not a VR project. It's not just a VR project. I think it's really important that we don't think this is about where we're going, not where we currently are. So, having said that, we're looking for game changers. We are definitely not looking for just the next thing that you were thinking of doing and a bit bigger. That's not what this money is for. We're definitely not looking for the same thing you're already doing, but a lot bigger. And we're not looking for things that can't be a core for the future of the sector. So we're looking for iconic projects that will advance people's understanding. Now, one of the worries here that some people have expressed, as we've been talking about it, is this level of funding is beyond people's current experience. So I think there's lots of people in the room who know what 20 grand VR or AR project looks like. I think we've all done the museums on mobile phones objects thing. We're not talking about doing that again. A lot of people know what a 50 grand or a 200 grand project looks like, but who knows what a £4 million project looks like. So I think we recognise that, and that is actually what we want. So this is a very deliberate decision not to salami slice the funding, but to try and build big propositions to test big concepts. So it's going to be bigger than a lot of people, level than people are working at in terms of the thinking, the scope, the production, the talent you might use, the scale of the experience, the length of the experience, all of those things. And there are lots of people in the sector that we want to move forward, which is across the creative industries, who are used to working at that level. After all, £4 million is only a moderately budgeted independent film. So that's how we think of it. But on the other hand, we do need to be sure that we spend it wisely. So we need people who can, within Consortium, who can spend this wisely, even though it is an upscaling budget. And we will look to inspect signs of over-budgeting. So what would be a sign of over-budgeting? In the moving image area, it would be paying for rights. Because if there's money to pay for rights, then there's two things. The rights owners don't think they're going to get enough out of the project to not extract some funding out of it. And if you've got money to pay for rights, then you haven't got enough ambition to consume the available funding. So we think you're going to need consortia. These are not single projects, single company projects, or even single institution plus one company projects. We don't think. So you need everybody across the value chain. You need lots of specialists in different areas. Any of you who worked in this area will know that largely that's the case. And we also think your consortium needs a vision to impact the sector, as I said, not just deliver to that single company or institution. That's the justification for public funding. Definitions, immersive experience. Again, we don't have many definitions. We've got a few. Multi-sensory narrative or interactive audience experience is mediated through technologies including list. You'll notice it's not an exclusive list. We're quite happy for people to justify the inclusion of other technologies as immersive. No doubt we'll get somebody who's just puts in a £4 million theatre project saying theatre is immersive, so what? We're just going to go and do that. It's actually not a bad argument compared with other things like. And this is our working definition of what we mean by visitor experience. And you might take issue with it. Quite happy to have a discussion with it, but this will be what's in the documentation on Monday. So audience propositions that curate, design, interpret or present cultural or entertainment experiences within a physical location. So including galleries, object or memory-based institutions, including cultural and heritage locations, including theme parks. And maybe theme parks and commercial visitor experiences, and maybe there's lots of learning that could happen between those two. And we're particularly encouraging that. So innovative tie-ups between those experiences. I mean, it always strikes me that if you're running a commercial visitor experience, there are things that you can do in your space that you control it that aren't complicated by the unbelievably precious objects. Lead bidders. So, as I said, this is industrial research funding. So, to be eligible to lead a bid, you must be a UK registered business. Carry out the project work in the UK and to intend to exploit the results in or from the UK. That doesn't mean that in your demonstrator audience tests you're confined to the UK at all. This is a global business. And you have to work in collaboration. There has to be at least one SME in the partnership. I'm sure everybody has at their fingertips the European Union definition of an SME. If not, it's on the internet. And there are some constraints because we've got a really short amount of time, and we think it's sensible for you not to constrain you from putting too many bids. So if you want to lead a bid, you can only lead one. If you want to lead a bid, you can only be a partner in 2 other bids. On the other hand, because of this complex supply chain, we think it's quite appropriate that there are businesses who will want to be involved as expert suppliers into multiple bids, and there are no limits on that at all. So lead one. If you lead, you can only be named on 2 others. But if you're not leading, as many as you like. This is. You may think the rest of the talk is tedious, but this is normally tedious bit. But it's quite important. So, as I said, this £4 million number is the maximum amount of grant funding that you can have across the consortium. We do require, because this is an industrial research project, significant match funding. So, for instance, if you wanted to claim 4 million, the maximum amount of grant, your total project cost will have to be in excess of 5 million. We'll be doing some work through examples of this because it does depend on the mix of your consortium. So the total cost is a combination of the grant and the contributions that you're bringing from your partners. I have to say, we're looking at funding projects where those total costs will be between 5 and 10 million. Now, obviously, match funding is more readily available in some sectors than others. One might expect that a major sports event or rights holder, there is more money in that system than others, but that doesn't mean that we've reserved for visitor experience a don't try and find match funding, because we haven't. It's still required, whatever the sector. Again, if you're used to Innovate UK, the stuff will be familiar, but as it's industrial research, if you're an SME, you get 70% of your total costs back. If you're a medium-sized business, 60, and if you're a large business, 50. A lot of the businesses in the field will be well, some of them will be familiar, but we expect to have some people who've never applied for Innovate funding before, and will be offering support tutorials on that. If you're a research organisation and an IRO, you get funded at the normal 100% or 80% FEC. I pretend I know what that means, and I never do. Other research organisations can also claim 100% of their costs, so you might be a research technology organisation. The constraints being you've got to be non-profit distributing, that you have a commitment to disseminating project results. But the kicker here is that only 30% in total of the grant funding can go to research organisations. If you're a public sector organisation as a charity, you also get 100% of eligibility. But if you're one of those kind of organisations, there is an onus on you to prove clearly why this is separate from your other public funding, and that'll be inspected. And that kind of brings us to the timeline. That is this year, by the way, just in case anyone's wondering. So the application deadline is the 1st of August at noon. And again, for anybody who's done Innovate UK funding, they really mean at noon. I had a colleague once who put a submission in at 2 minutes past 12. And it was just junked by the system. So do familiarise yourself with the Innovate platform. It's not bad, but it does have a hard cut-off. We're going to assess it over August. We're going to invite people to interview at the start of September, and we're going to run the panel, the decision-making process, get authorisation from the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund board, and do notification of awards by the end of the month. probably. But that's the ambition, because otherwise we can't get this done. So projects start 1st of November and have to complete by the 31st of December 2020. So it's basically 2 years and a bit, which again, it could help you with, if you've got a really massive project, you've got a constrained time. But you'll notice that that actually, from the previous slide, the end of the financial year is actually the March 2021. So there's a tiny bit of leeway in that, but not very much. So that's it. We hope it's really exciting.
Keep you quiet.
Okay, so sorry, we've had to format it like this to enable the speed networking because I rambled on too much this morning. But what we're going to do is, there's a new timey thing. We're not going to stick to that timetable. What we're going to do is I'm going to do 20 minutes of questions because we didn't have a chance for earlier on. That's a bit awkward for the people with the back to me. I'm sure you'll work it out. So if there are no questions raised by the competition brief or anything like that, we can move straight on. But I assume that there might be. So, okay, starting at the back.
Hi, I'm Rob from Reality 01. We're creating a platform for reality capture, which makes it really speedy to get objects into virtual and immersive environments. But my question is, in terms of the kind of piece that we're talking about for this Audience of the Future bid, do you see it as something that has like an end point? Is it a finished published piece, or is it something that should evolve and grow over time and not have a kind of time limit?
So I think that's going to depend on circumstances and the consortium, the objectives they have. So in some places it might be a finished piece, maybe not but in this sector, I think the idea of something that the partners take on that is more open-ended, I can imagine that being a kind of key thing, depending on the consortium. So I don't think we're fixed on either of them. I think we also would expect in some cases not to build up to one massive audience proposition, but maybe to develop in different environments or different versions out there along the way, although two and a bit years is pretty tight for doing that kind of thing. So I think it's one of those things that we've got no fixed model on, and as consortium come together, I think it's something you're going to try and work out amongst yourselves and the different partners within it, would be my guess. So next door, if the microphone's down there, we're going to work from the back to the front and to make it easier for Eliza.
Hi, Andy Smart from University of Exeter. My question is, looking at all the presentations we had, my question is, in these actual bids, what proportion of the bid will be devoted to actually understanding visitors and audience? And what proportion, or is that really confined to the collaborative R&D? Because it seems there was one speaker that talked a lot about the audience or understanding the individual, and the rest were really talking about the tech. So I'm just wondering whether or not there is a role for really conducting some investigation into the audience within the demonstrators.
If you remember, I showed a slide where what our objectives were, and one of them was insight. So we expect that you will devise an audience insight programme that goes from who are our audience, what are we trying to achieve, right through to the kind of demonstrated tests and what data do we gather on, what insight have we generated. But as to proportions, it's up to you, really. I mean, it'd be crazy if we dictated that, I think. Some people will bring, I suppose partnerships will bring together people who have that or have a particular approach to it. I think there's a role here a lot for the research community around behavioural insight and audience insight. I think, there's some really interesting kind of measures of immersivity that people are trying to develop, so you can actually test in the wild without the audience feeling that they're mice in a maze. So we expect it. In fact, it's a requirement. But I don't think we can say how you do it, but we'll expect you to say how you're going to do it. Becky.
Hi, I'm going to stand. I'm Becky from Digital Catapult, and
Sorry, Becky's now going to do the right answer to this question. I just realised. Sorry.
alternate answer. So as you heard, we're providing a sort of overarching support role for the bids, but in fact, audience research and insight across all of them is really important, and in fact, that whole piece connecting those together so that we're learning not just from one demonstrator's audience, but all of them is really important to us as well. So we expect that's going to be partly sitting within your teams, and we will provide support and some effort there to help make sure they're consistent and that we can get as much insight as we can. So I'd just encourage you to speak to us if you have any questions about that, and we can try and help you work through that.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. So there is a bit that's yours and how you're going to do it, but we want out of the programme to be able to make meaningful comparisons and the insights generated across, and that the Catapult are going to enable us to do that. Yeah.
Hi, Oliver Cox, University of Oxford. It was a question about the geographical distribution of the potential industry partners, only because we've heard from 3 London-based companies. So I was just interested whether you are going to be setting any parameters around that, or it will just be, seeing how it goes.
So I don't know if this. No, I'm going to take this thing off. Are we going to set any? Is there an economic geography aspect to this? So you'll have seen the clusters programme that I talked about is in many ways an exercise in economic geography in the creative industries. So in that programme, we've placed a great weight on that. In this programme, I think we'll be mindful. I think it would be, let's face it, across most of the creative industries, if you grab Britain by Keith Ness and shake it, creative industries fall down to the bottom. That's not a situation that I think the whole industrial strategy wants to remain as it is. It's not going to be a criteria. Our criteria is quality first. I think it will be interesting that as the consortia build, I think it's quite possible you'll see a considerable geographic distribution of the members of the consortium, and we'd be obviously very keen to see that and to support that and to do any networking, enable any networking to make that possible. Yeah.
Cool, thanks. Shameless promotion time. Kevin Blair from Data Realities. On the 6th of October, we will be launching a 6,000 square foot warehouse, which will be the world's largest free-roaming 4-dimensional multiplayer VR experience, and it's commercially viable, subject to investment, which is leading. Well, let's put it this way, we're telling everyone we're doing it. My 2 questions. First of all, your schedule was for projects to launch on the 1st of November.
Yeah.
6th of October, too far ahead. Can we move that? Is that Can we qualify on that?
Well,
We have a platform that we can use pretty much everyone's skill set in this room and give them an option to do everything from gain customer feedback to reactions from haptic suits and all that type of stuff. But we start on the 6th of October. You guys say it starts on the 1st of November for the project.
I guess I would take from that you've got an amazing facility that could
tested everything
that could be part of it. The fact that you've opened for business before the project start, I don't see as a problem.
Okay, it's again, the only thing we're waiting for is buying the kit. That's the only thing that's costing us money. The second question then was, you mentioned on the creative part where you encourage investors for VCs to come in.
Yeah.
Because obviously if we need to match fund, we need to have some sort of fund to ourselves to match a £4 million budget. So in our case it's 300,000, we need to match that. Venture capitalists in this country are not looking into VR at the moment properly.
I'm not sure that's entirely true, actually. They're investing in particular,
my journey argues.
They're investing in particular bits of the market, which may not, maybe a rather slant-eyed view of where the future goes. But we don't expect. I mean, it'd be an interesting model, but I suppose we hadn't imagined VC match funding in this, but it's possible. We wouldn't. There's no way it'd be excluded. It'd be really welcomed because it comes in the form of cash.
My question was, what were you guys doing on that part of it to attract?
So I think, as I say, we're doing the investment accelerator specifically. So we're doing using a section of the funding. At the moment, it's 2 million to do a match fund with VCs. So we'll be inviting companies, single companies. That's the interesting thing to me about this model. It's single companies who have a plan that wants investment, and they'll go through. So briefly, how we think it's going to work. They'll go through the Innovate process, and as long as they score the 7 out of 10 or 70% that's fundable, we then put them in front of a panel of VCs. We're recruiting a panel of 5 or 6 VCs on the basis that they have to be people who can follow on fund. So probably it will be around the 150k mark in terms of the public investment. We'd expect match or doubling of that from the private side. And we're going to be pushed with everything else to get that spun up before the end of the year. But that's the timeline. So, I mean, please contact me and I'll keep you posted how that's going. If we have things, projects or companies that we know would fit that model, that would help us design it better and quicker. You're just waiting to chat to each other, aren't you now? So, great. Okay, Tara, speed networking time, and let's see if this sector can embrace this in the way that the performance sector did.